Library and A Likely Story. Welcome to tonight's A Toast to Romance. This is part of Book Lovers Week in Carroll County. We would like to thank our partners, Prince George's County Memorial Library System and Talbot County Free Library, as well as HarperCollins and Sourcebook Publishing. We are toasting romance with 5 fabulous romance authors. We will get to questions after our discussion, so please leave your comments and questions in the chat bar, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the conversation. Tessa Bailey is a New York Times bestselling author, USA Today bestselling author of contemporary romance. Tessa aspires to 3 things: writing hot and unforgettable character-driven romance, being a good mother, and eventually sneaking onto a judging panel on a reality show baking competition. She lives in New York, on Long Island, New York, with her husband and daughter. If you want a sexy, heartfelt, humorous romance with a guaranteed happy ending, Tessa is the right one for you. Her new novel, Terms of Endearment, released today. Congratulations.
Thank you. Did I write Terms of Endearment? Oh my God.
Tools. I'm sorry.
Terms of engagement. Yeah.
I said terms.
It's okay.
Alexandra Bellefleur is a 2018 Romance Writers of American Golden Heart finalist. Looking for a swoony contemporary romance featuring lovable grumps and the sunshine characters who bring them to their knees? Or perhaps a charming queer rom-com about a free-spirited social media astrologer? Then Alexandria's books are a great choice for your bookshelf. A Pacific Northwesterner at heart, Alexandria has a weakness for good coffee, Pike Place IPA, and voodoo donuts. Alexandria's new novel, Written in the Stars, releases on November 10th. Olivia Dade writes broady rom-coms with big hearts. Olivia has an MA in American history and has worked at a variety of jobs that required the donning of actual pants. Colonial Williamsburg interpreter, high school teacher, academic tutor, and of course, a librarian. Now, however, she has finally achieved her lifelong goal of wearing pajamas all day as a hermit-like writer and enthusiastic hag. She currently lives outside Stockholm with her patient Swedish husband, their whip-smart daughter, and the family's collection of books. Spoiler alert from Olivia releases on October 6th. Jenny Holliday has a PhD in urban geography, and one of her favorite jobs was promoting research at a major university, which allowed her to become an armchair astronomer, a historian, or a particle physicist, depending on the day. She then decided to try her hand at romance writing, and she is now a Rita-nominated and USA Today bestselling author of contemporary and historical romance novels. A Princess for Christmas by Jenny releases on October 13th. And our moderator for tonight is Eliza Knight. She is a USA bestselling author of historical romance. Looking for a Scottish romance or a Highland pirate, or perhaps you cannot resist a sexy historical cowboy? Well, if any of these catch your fancy, then Eliza's books will as well. History can be quite fascinating, sexy, intriguing, and altogether delicious. Eliza peels away the layers on her historical blog, History Undressed. Book 1 of Prince Charlie's Angels, The Rebel Wears Plaid, came out in June, and Book 2, Truly Madly Plaid, comes out on December 29th. All of these books are available or can be pre-ordered at a Likely Story bookstore. All books purchased through a Likely Story will receive a signed book plate from the author. Go to www.sykesvillebooks.com or call a store to order. Now, please join me in a toast to romance. May romance be part of your life, your happiness, and your bookshelf. To Tessa and your new book, happy launch day. I am personally very happy to add a new word to my vocabulary, Zellweger. But if you don't know, you have to read the book. To Eliza, Jenny, Olivia, and Alexandria, may your new and upcoming books be successful and bring happiness, romance to all your readers. Cheers.
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 Now I'm going to turn it over to you, Eliza. Thank you, ladies, all for being part of our Book Lovers Week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm so excited to be here this evening hosting such an awesome group of authors. I'd like to first start off and give you guys each a chance to talk about your new books or your upcoming books or your released books. Tessa, why don't you start since today was your release day?
Awesome. So yes, I've been writing the Hot and Hammered series for Avon, and it concluded today with the final book, Tools of Engagement. This is it. And we've kind of been following Bethany. She's like the type A house stager, and she's been present in the series as kind of like this woman who has just completely she's been done wrong by men, and she's kind of done. And so when Wes, this like cocky guy from Texas, shows up on the scene, she's really not having it. And but he, you know, like he secretly kind of has this thing for her. And so when she decides to flip a house on her own and she's completely overwhelmed, he comes to help and encourage her. And then they end up on a reality show, competing against her brother, who is like the basically the patriarch of the family, like the house stager. And so it's good. It's about a woman coming into her own and realizing her own abilities, but at the same time, it's a really swoony romance with a lot of enemies to lovers banter.
That sounds like so much fun. I have some specific questions for you, but we'll get back to that after everyone else gets to talk about their books. So Alexandria, how about you?
Definitely. So I don't have like a physical copy of my book, so I just have the little electronic copy. Yeah, I love the cover. So Written in the Stars is a queer holiday rom-com with some fun nods to Pride and Prejudice and Bridget Jones's Diary. So Elle Jones is a free-spirited social media astrologer who is looking for her soulmate, and she goes on a blind date with Darcy Lowell, who is a uptight actuary who is kind of jaded on love. The date is an utter disaster. Spilled wine, it's a catastrophe. But in a bid to keep her brother off her back, Darcy tells him the date went well, that she and Elle hit it off. Elle gets sucked into Darcy's lie and agrees to fake a relationship over the holidays. Hijinks ensue, and a fake relationship becomes more than either of them bargained for.
I love hijinks.
All right, Olivia, how about you?
So as you may recall, Game of Thrones ended this last year, and I think it's fair to say that the last season was not universally beloved. People who watched it, and around the same time that the series was finishing up, all these interviews came out with cast members who were all asked what they thought of the final season. And some of those interviews were hilariously awkward, more like impromptu hostage videos. Okay? Rather than, and unfairly or unfairly, some of those interviews were interpreted as perhaps showing that the actors were not entirely thrilled with the final season either, which sort of prompted the idea for me that if you had an actor on a show like that, this huge blockbuster show, and you absolutely loathe the way that the show had gone, particularly the final season, but the final several seasons, but you couldn't really say anything about it in public because you can't sort of criticize your show publicly, be unlikely to get a job again in the future. What would you do? And I also had been reading basically nothing but Jaime Lannister, Brienne of Tarth fan fiction for a year. So I decided that what this actor would do is write anonymous fan fiction about his own show and basically write fix-it fic about his show and be part of these fan boards basically critical of how his show has been, and would have formed a relationship with a woman that he met online, also anonymous, and they would beta read each other's fan fiction and become pine for each other, but of course he can't say who he is. And then he meets her in person and there's a lot of chemistry, but he really can't tell her that he already knows her. So that's the premise of, spoiler alert, which is about fandom, and it's about fan fiction, and it's about fatness and family, and I love it. I think it's funny, and I think it's swoony, and I can't wait for people to read it.
I love that. I have so many thoughts on the Outlander thing, so another time about that. Jennifer, why don't you tell us about your book?
My book is called A Princess for Christmas. And my joke, but it's actually kind of true, is that it was my attempt to write a Hallmark Christmas movie in book format, except with a lot of sex and swearing. Yay. So the origin of the story is actually my dad, who is my biggest fan, and I love him. I would actually prefer if he maybe didn't read my book, but he does. He persists. We don't talk about them in detail. But he also was a huge fan of Hallmark Christmas movies. I live in Canada where we don't have the Hallmark Channel. He lives in the US. So when I usually go visit him for a while during the holidays, and we gorge Hallmark Christmas movies. And he always is completely guileless. He'll say, how is this going to work out? I just don't see a way that this is going to work out for these two. And I'll say, well, obviously there's going to be a ball, and the butler guy is going to turn out to be the fairy godfather, and it always works out. So at one point, I guess I just thought, I wonder if I could write one of these. And it turns out I could, but I actually couldn't make it sweet. I mean, it is sweet, but it's also spicy.
Yeah, I like that. And also, your dad sounds really fun.
My dad, is like a small town romance character. He goes around, well, pre-pandemic, he drives around to Walmart and Barnes and Noble and rearranges things. Aww. So that my books are where he thinks they should be.
That's awesome. That's so fun. So I have a couple questions for you guys. Tessa, I'm going to start with you. First of all, I was reading through all of your guys' books, and you had me at Enemies and then Flip a House. I was immediately kind of obsessed with that because I love those kinds of shows, like real estate shows, whether they're selling, buying, Gonna Live Abroad or Live at the Beach, or just looking in their area, or they're designing, flipping, whatever. So I have to know, do you watch any of those shows, and what's your favorite?
I do. I watch those shows and with my husband, mainly the ones where they're looking for a mansion, yeah. And they're they go in and I'm like, these people are actors. They're not real. There's no way that these people are actually complaining about the balcony being too small on this $1 million mansion, $1 billion mansion. But I normally watch Love It or List It, although I'm very specific about the host that I like. And of course, you got to watch the Joanna Gaines for the shiplap. You got to be in it for the shiplap. But I love HGTV, and mostly because I just find it really soothing. I can do other things while it's on. Yeah. I don't necessarily have to be 100% focused on it, but I love HGTV and cooking shows and things that are just homey and soothing.
I like those too. I've recently been binging also Selling Sunset, which is so dramatic. I can't dramatic. It's so bad. Oh man. Okay, so Alexandria, first off, I love Pride and Prejudice, a huge fan, and so I was super excited for your fun take on the main characters of the story. And obviously, if you toss in a fake engagement, it's all my favorite things, pretend date, fiance, whatever you're doing, I love that. So if your book were to be made into a movie, who would you cast as the main characters? And do you think Keira Knightley would get another starring role?
Gosh, that's so hard. When I was writing this, I have actually 2 models in mind, so they're not actresses. I don't know if Keira Knightley would really fit in, even though her version of Pride and Prejudice is my favorite. I do like that version best, but I don't know. I kind of want to keep it fuzzy in my head and fuzzy for readers. So if that did happen, you can kind of insert your own redhead and blonde. Yeah.
That's fun. Do you share the models on your social media so people can see what you were thinking?
I Haven't yet, but I have plans to upcoming, before release. Yeah.
Awesome. Very cool. All right, so Olivia, I love the premise of fan fiction and cosplay, and I'm seriously jealous of some of my friends who have gone to like Comic-Cons and been able to take pictures with people like Jensen Ackles and Sam Ewan. So I have to know, have you ever been to any cons like that before? And if you have, who did you meet? And if you haven't been, who would you most likely love to meet if you could go when there's no pandemic?
I have not. I mean, I've been to conventions for different things, but not fan conventions, although I suspect that may change sometime. I'm basically just going to want to continually be around people once we can be around people,
right?
And, I mean, I'm an introvert, and at this point, I just want to hug everyone.
Yeah.
The thing is about me is that in many ways I am pretty outgoing, but in a lot of other ways I am quite shy, and I really hate the idea of imposing on someone. And so I would be horribly awkward and probably unable to make eye contact with anyone famous. Like, I'm horrified. Sometimes people, if I'm talking about a star, they tag that star in my tweet. And I'm like, no, I do not need this person. I do not want to be in their mentions. They don't want to know about me. So no, I would be horrified, unable to speak. So
I am seriously socially awkward, so I think I'd be in the same position. I would just not know what to do, and I would like end up staring at them really weirdly, and they'd be like, who is this lady? Get her away from us. So Jennifer, I'm a sucker for a modern day princess. Obviously followed the stories of real life princesses Meghan and Kate, and my all-time favorite modern heroine is Princess Mia of Genovia. So my love of princesses started when I was young, reading favorite fairy tales, which happens to be Cinderella. Do you have a favorite fairy tale?
A good question. It sounds kind of ridiculous to say because I wrote this sort of reverse Cinderella tale, reverse being that he's the one that's swept away into the rags to riches story. But I haven't really consumed fairy tales since I was young, but I did used to be, again, this is a bit off brand, but I used to be kind of obsessed with the actual original version of The Little Mermaid, which is actually terrible. I don't know if you know it, but she trades her voice for legs, but she has, like her legs always feel like knives are she's being attacked by knives, and then she goes to land to woo the prince and he forsakes her. So I kind of like the dark fairy tales in real life.
I love dark fairy tales too. Those are fun.
I mean, mind you, I like the regular, I mean, I'm the one who's sitting watching Hallmark movies, so I like them all. But, you know, it's interesting to see how they have changed over the centuries, right?
I like that. Yeah. So Tessa, back to you. What's one of your favorite romantic lines a character says in your novel?
Oh, in Tools of Engagement?
Yeah, or anyone. If you can't think of one for that, you can name any book.
Oh my gosh. So I think there's a part where, I think I'm going with her. I've been saying that, so Zellwegering is like a verb I created in this book because he, you know the scene in Jerry Maguire when he's leaving the sports agency and he's like, who's coming with me?
Yeah.
And nobody stands up, and Zellweger stands up and she's like, I'll go with you. and he's like, thank you. And then they leave with the goldfish, and it's very dramatic. And I think that's the most romantic thing, is like when someone puts themselves on the line for you, and like, you know, even financially, because they believe in you. And he does that in this book, kind of reluctantly, but he, you know, in front of all of his construction worker friends, she's kind of spiraling out in front of them, arguing with her brother, and he just takes off his gloves and he goes, I'll go with you. And it just changes the whole, like their whole dynamic. It becomes like, she's like, do I even know who this person was all along? Because they've been enemies throughout the series. And I think that was the most romantic to me. I mean, I'm sure he says some other like more flowery things throughout the book, but I think the vote of confidence to me was really romantic.
I love that. That's awesome. That sounds really good. Alexandria, can you name your favorite character traits about Darcy and Ella?
Yeah, definitely. I love how hopeful Elle is. Elle is a like perpetual optimist, and that's something I wish we're a bit more optimistic like Elle. Optimistic, always wanting to see the best in people, look on the bright side, whereas Darcy's extremely loyal, like ride or die for her friends and family. She, takes a while to open up, but once she does, she is definitely ride or die for her friends. So yeah, the loyalty and the hopefulness, I think it meshes well together. Those would be the two I would pick.
That's awesome. I like that. Okay, Olivia, your book deals a lot with perception, how we are perceived by other people or in person or online, dressing up, however it may be. So I'm curious about your inspiration for that.
I think that the experience of being someone who lives a good chunk of her life online, as many of us do, specifically in my case on Twitter, that I try to be relatively authentic. That pretty much the person that you meet on Twitter, for good or ill, is pretty much the person that you're going to meet in real life too. But that even if that person you meet is authentic, that doesn't mean that that's my entirety or the entirety of the people that you meet on there, that there are vulnerabilities there and histories there, that, even though you're the person that you are online is truthful, there may be things that are not discussed. And of course, there are also people who do form personas, and usually there is a reason for that. And so part of the book is about how hard it is to form genuine communities and friendships if you are inauthentic, but that there are reasons why people choose to be inauthentic. And those are reasons that often have to be worked through. That is really vague, and I apologize about
it's a really good explanation, and I'm constantly fascinated by all the different roles that we have to play specifically online, and even on different online platforms. Like, you may be one way on Twitter and a little bit different on Facebook, depending on who you're talking to. So I just thought that was really interesting, and I like that your book kind of has some undertones of what's going on behind those social scenes.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, I have to know, is Eldovia a real place? And I didn't Google beforehand because I didn't want to spoil the answer for myself. And if it's not, in what country inspired it, or did you come up with it like completely on your own? Yeah.
It's not real. It's just kind of a fictional, small alpine country. That said, I have kind of worked out what it's like. I will tell you that I went through a lot to try to come up with an appropriate name for my fictional country. So it's like Switzerland. It's sort of influenced by French and German, and they speak both languages. But I don't speak French. I used to speak a little bit of German. My husband speaks French. And so I was kind of coming up with like nonsense words that sounded sort of vaguely either like they belonged in the French Alps or the German Alps. And my first, I'm not going to be able to remember what it was, but my first attempt, I ran by my husband and he said, that means meat in French. And I went, it wasn't my first attempt. It was like, I thought it was the perfect ultimate name, but that had to get vetoed. So no, it's fake. It's all fake.
It's so cool. And it's alive in the book. So thank you guys for indulging me in those questions. Now I thought we could each kind of talk about some other topics. For instance, I would like to know how writing has been for you guys during this pandemic. And Tessa, you can go ahead and start.
It's weird, like when it started off, I was able to write faster than I'd been writing before. And I think that was because I was trying to escape my family. So I was like, just like pretending to be really focused on what I was doing, but then actually it worked. It just like, I just like kind of remained glued to my keyboard. I wrote a 100,000 word book for Avon and turned it in early, and I was shocked. And then I kind of since then have slowed down. And like the thing I'm writing right now is like a huge struggle. I think I just like blew my wad for lack of a better term. But you know, and now I'm kind of going like, I can't even think of where this plot is going. Like it's almost like my brain has just completely deserted me. So I'm working through it. I refuse to have writer's block. I still get my word count, but it's a struggle, and it takes me a lot longer than it usually does these days. So, and also because my kid she's right on the other side of the store. I'm like, yes, just buy whatever video game it is. Just give me an hour. And that's usually the whole day for me. So trying to get an hour here and an hour there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I've been trying to get up super early before my kids wake up, just so that I can get like some moments of peace. Mm-hmm. And that's helped me out a lot, but also getting up early really sucks.
It does help. Yeah. I've been getting up at probably 6:30.
Yeah.
And the house doesn't really wake up till like 8. So an hour and a half, but usually I'm just staring at my phone and just trying to wake up.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of productivity.
Seems unfair to wake up when it's still dark out.
Very hard.
What about you, Alexandria?
Pandemic writing. My second book was written, my first draft, I wrote it in January, February, March of the year. So right, like when everything was starting with the pandemic, kind of like summering. So the first draft went well, but the revisions were like pulling teeth. Yeah. I don't know. It's just like focusing on the light, fluffy rom-com with everything being unstable out there was really hard. Not gonna lie, it was rough. But I just turned in my revisions, and they're going to copy edits. So
hey, congratulations!
Thanks. I pulled it off, I guess.
You did.
So yeah, I mean, it was rough, but also having, I guess, a lot of support from friends who are going through it too was helpful. So you know, community helped me a lot.
That's awesome. I think that's so true. Like having those people that you can kind of just like lean on, or even just like vent to, or even if you just need a distraction, like, hey, tell me something funny, to kind of pull you out and help you with that.
Definitely.
What about you, Olivia?
Well, I live with 2 extroverts in an apartment, and they were home. Now my daughter is going to school. I'm in Sweden, but they were home for about 6 months, and it was either muzzle them or change my schedule. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is that I ended up going to bed like 6 a.m. So my work was basically after they went to bed. But the hard part was my daughter was still getting up at 6 or 7, and my husband was 2 or 3 a.m. And I just wanted him to go to sleep. Go to bed. So please. By myself in the house. So I'm just now getting my schedule back in order because I spent months. And, you know, I actually did write the book I just turned in a couple weeks ago, my second book in the series, the follow-up to Spoiler Alert. And I'm pleased with it. It is insanely long, like incredibly long. I have never run long like this before. So I don't know if that was, as you were saying, just avoidance of my family. Like if I never stop writing, I don't have to rejoin my family during the days. I don't know what that was, but it is turned in, but I am dreading the revisions because unless they do something about the word count, I've got to get rid of like 25% of the book.
Whoa, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Well, fingers crossed they let you keep it, because
was it Mariana Zapata who always does for like really long? I was like, we're gonna marry Mariana Zapata this bee.
She writes like 250,000 word books.
But I'm not gonna do that.
That's like 2 or 3 books in one. It's funny that you were talking about going long, because I feel like I've kind of written a lot longer in the last 8 months or whatever too. And it sort of drives me crazy. Like, why won't this book just end? There's just more and more. And I don't know if maybe it's the avoidance thing or the idea of starting a new project and not having like the brain power for it or what.
I was so tired at the end. I mean,
Yeah.
by the time I turned it in, I had planned on potentially coming up with other ideas for future books once I turned it in, and I have nothing. I sat down yesterday and I was like, normally I'm sort of boiling over with ideas, and I was just like scraped clean.
You're not the only one I've heard say that. A lot of people are saying that right now. It's just really hard to, I think, focus. I mean, there's so many things going on everywhere, but I hope you get the muse back soon.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. What about you, Jennifer?
The pandemic has coincided with sort of an imperfect storm of a lot of family medical junk, a lot of it over the border in the US where I can't get. So I've been pretty much a basket case, to be honest with you.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So, but I will tell you that my early innovation, which did work for a long time, was to empower my night owl son to stay up as late as he wants, as long as he's reading. And I bought him his own Kobo and hooked it to my account so I could see what he's reading and said, go to town, like buy whatever you want. So my husband and I would go to bed, he would stay up, I'd wake up the next morning and get like the 11 p.m. receipt for whatever's the next, he reads spy novels exclusively, like middle grade spy novels is his thing. But he thought he was getting away with something, and in a way he was, but you know, it was like 3 hours that he stays up reading is, to me, is 3 hours he's not playing video games. So I just basically manipulated his schedule to suit my own needs, because then he slept in and I got up early like you, and that enabled me to sort of limp along. But I'm going to be honest with you, it has been really, really tough. I was telling the group before we went live that you know how you have kind of a vision of yourself, and part of my vision of myself is I'm the person who meets my commitments. I'm never late, like to meetings or with anything. I'm working on my 23rd book right now, and I had to ask for my first ever extension. So, you know, I act like that's a big failure. I needed another month. It's fine. It's going to be fine. But it's been a rough 6 months.
I had to ask for an extension too, so you're not alone there. It's just
Guess
really
what? You don't die if you ask for an extension.
Right.
That's what I learned.
Yeah, and they're so busy too right now with everything that I don't think a lot of them are being too harsh with us if we're a little bit late. Hopefully, fingers crossed. So for me, writing historical, I get a lot of my inspiration from history, reading articles, old letters, documentaries, which I'm totally obsessed with. So I'm curious, where do you guys get your inspiration from? And Olivia already talked a little bit about this, but what about you, Tessa?
Honestly, everywhere, you know, just listening to stories from friends, even just like a location or a song or, you know, like a restaurant or anything can kind of go, you just kind of look around and go, I wonder what stories happen here, you know? Like recently I watched this documentary about this man, it's called like John Wanted to Contact Aliens. It's called something like that. Maybe you guys have seen it.
No.
But it's like a 15-minute documentary on Netflix that I just happened to click on. And it's about this man who like broadcasted a radio station into outer space for like decades because he wanted to communicate with aliens. Like, and so he had like a radio station. And he ended up meeting his partner who'd like listened to the radio station. So he didn't actually contact aliens, but he met his like soulmate. And I was like, I want to write something about like, what would it be like to be the son or daughter of someone who like was trying to contact aliens? Like that would just shape your whole life. And so like the thing I'm writing now is kind of about that. And, you know, like having regrets over how you treat your parents when you're younger and you get older and you look back and realize you kind of made mistakes, things like that. But, and that comes from real life. But the inspiration really comes from anywhere, you know. That's the easy part to me. The hard part is actually translating it onto paper.
Yeah. I have to check out that show. I haven't seen that yet, but it sounds really
the name of it, yeah. like later.
Okay, yeah.
later.
Text me or email.
I'll say it next time you come to me for a question, I'll have it.
Yeah. Alexandria, what about you?
Yeah, everywhere. Music is definitely a big inspiration for me. I know that my playlist for Written in the Stars is definitely Taylor Swift heavy, lover vibes galore. So music, eavesdropping on conversations, which I can't really do right now. Movies, Written in the Stars was definitely inspired by, Pride and Prejudice and Bridget Jones's Diary, but also some of the other big rom-coms of the late 90s and, early 2000s. Some of like Nora Ephron's best, films, some of the, really like ensemble pieces. So everywhere, but definitely lighter media for me mostly. I like darker media, but that's not where I get my inspiration from, probably.
What's your favorite 90s movie?
Notting Hill.
Oh, I like that
Ooh.
one. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
So Olivia, you already talked a little bit about like Game of Thrones and all that, but what else has inspired you? Oh my gosh. I'm gonna shut my door real quick. I'm sorry. My dog's being annoying.
No, I have written stories for the flimsiest of reasons. Sometimes better reasons than others. 40 Love, for instance, was literally, I wrote because of the title. I was watching tennis and the score was 40 Love on one of the games. And I thought to myself, that would be a very good romance title. Someone should write that.
Yeah.
And I was like, that someone could be me since I am a romance writer. And then I decided that I would want the heroine to be 40. And that it would be a much younger hero and that he could be a former tennis pro who sort of doesn't know what to do when his career gets vastly shortened because of injury. So he's 26, she's 40, they meet on vacation, and where does it go from there? And that was just from the title. So it can be fan fiction, it can be some dude that I'm drooling over that I just decide that I want to write a book about. So it can be any combination of things.
That's so fun. I was during this whole like period of not being able to leave the house or anything, I decided I was randomly going to take up playing tennis, and I'm really terrible at it, but it's a lot of fun. And I don't know anything about the rules, so I don't even know what 40 Love means, but
As long as you're having
sounds
a good
like an
time.
awesome title. So let's see. What do you think is the best name you've ever given a character in any of your books, Tessa?
Oh, well, going back to my first series, I named a character Story Brooks, and I didn't even realize until like later on that it was like storybook, like it sounded like storybook. That's one of my favorite.
I like that one. That's cool.
Yeah, I like Story Brooks. I really like kind of picking names based on like the way I think a character's personality. So it's always fun for me to like when I have a rich kind of stuck up character, getting to name them like Hayden Winstead or like just kind of like giving the readers like a preview of what's to come with this character,
Yeah.
But yeah, I will always love the name Jack for a hero. For some reason, I always love a hero named Jack.
How many Jacks do you have?
Just one. I don't think I can have more than one. I think that's it, right? You fill your quota.
Yeah, I think so. That's true.
Oh wait, that Netflix documentary was called John Was Trying to Contact Aliens. That's what it's called. It's on Netflix. It's It's only 20 minutes long. It's really good.
Perfect. It's a great lunchtime thing. Thank you. And one word about Jacks. I think people do kind of get like hung up on a certain name, like thinking it's sexy too, because my high school daughter has only ever dated guys that were named either Jackson, Jack, or some other Jack type word. There's been like 5 of them. It's really weird.
Yeah, no, she feels me.
She totally does. She's going to be your fan in her future. What about you, Alexandria?
Darcy. Darcy's a gimme. I like
love that name. Yeah.
Darcy you know, I mean, it's a nod to Pride and Prejudice and, you know, all the different iterations of it. But I have this one line in Written in the Stars where Darcy's talking to her brother Brendan, and he's trying to, you know, set her up with Elle, and you know, she's like, stop trying to marry me off. Like, I'm one of your characters in your favorite Jane Austen novel. So it's a little meta in that sense because the characters are well aware of their names as well.
Yeah.
So I liked that. Yeah.
That's an awesome line. What about you, Olivia?
Certain names just sound right to me, and certain names well, I'm a former teacher. This is what I would say, is I'm a former teacher, and if it was a kid, I loved my students, some slightly more than others. And if it was a kid that was particularly problematic for some reason, like I cannot make their name, particularly like some of the boys, I can't make their name. Like no one's calling out that kid's name in ecstasy.
Yeah.
Anytime soon. So like there's never going to be like no, I can't name names because I don't want to be rude. Like on the off chance that like 0% chance that one of these kids is watching.
Yep.
But there are certain names that will never, ever, ever be hero names because I just, no.
Yeah, I feel this way, like about an ex or someone that I really despise, like their name will never, ever grace the pages of my books. It would just be too awkward.
Or they could be the ex. They could be one of the
Oh yeah, they could be like a villain. Yeah.
Or they can, you know, I have used, it is possible that I have used some of those things, not for the MCs.
Yes, I did actually use one of my old boss's names as a villain in one of my very early works. She made a great villain.
Yeah.
What about you, Jennifer?
Well, I have a novella series that's set in the 80s, and it's called New Wave Newsroom. It's about a college newspaper in the 80s. And it started because I was invited to be part of an anthology where each novella was meant to be inspired by one song from the 80s. I couldn't stop with that, so I ended up writing a whole series. I don't recommend that. But anyway, I signed on before I had a song picked out, and I was talking to my agent, and she said, you should do you know that song 8675309/Jenny? Jenny and the number. Anyway, I was like, oh, I can't do that. But then the idea got in my head because the song is about seeing somebody's phone number written on the wall.
Yeah.
And if you're of a certain age, you maybe remember that was not a flattering thing to have happen to you. And the story just like landed fully formed in my head. So I named the main character Jenny. And then I put an author's note in at the end that said, I'm not really doing this because I'm not much of a jerk, but I'm like naming this after myself. But that was kind of funny. And then I got to come up with really good 80s names for like the next book. Heroine was named Dawn. And you know, which is just our names you don't see anymore.
What's your favorite 80s song besides If You Love the 8675309? Did I say that?
Well,
right?
I mean, I think the perfect like pop song period, which inspired the third book in the series, which is like beyond the 80s, the perfect pop song is Prince's When Doves Cry.
Oh yeah, I love that song.
I mean, that song is like poppy and you can dance to it, but there's this sort of like metaphor of interpersonal conflict attached to war. And
yeah,
I mean, and it just, you know, the way it starts, like dream if you will a courtyard, like, okay.
Yeah, perfect. He's a really good storyteller.
He's a great storyteller.
So back to you, Tessa. What is your favorite thing about being a romance author?
I think we have the best readers. You know, like whenever I go to like a book signing or anything where there's readers, it feels like long lost friends. I mean, with almost zero effort. It's really just a great icebreaker. I don't know if there's any better icebreaker in the world than loving romance novels and talking to people who also love them, because there's no judgment. It's very warm. It's a very warm and welcoming group of people. And that's what I miss the most in this pandemic, is not being able to go see people.
Yeah.
But I think that's my favorite part, is just the community on when it's at its best, is it's really good.
And everybody believing in happily ever afters makes it like
Agreed.
that, right?
Yes.
What about you, Alexandria?
I like writing characters that are both, aspirational but relatable, where the reader can see themselves in that character, but also want to strive to be a little bit more like that character. And I feel like romance kind of like bakes that in,
Yeah.
with the whole character arc aspect of the growth and the wholehearted aspect. So that would be my favorite thing, in addition to having just great readers. Yeah.
That's awesome. And you, Olivia?
I think, on a purely selfish level, writing romance and getting to know people specifically through Twitter, but in real life too, a lot of them I've met later in real life, has brought me a real sense of community, the likes of which I actually don't think I'd ever had before. So it's been deeply meaningful to me. Like, my closest friends are all part of the community, and even from across the Atlantic, I can still be part of that community and have those friendships. And that's a real source of joy for me always. I also feel really grateful and privileged and proud to have written the sort of characters that I was desperate to see when I was growing up, specifically in my case, fat characters, not used as a pejorative, just as a descriptor, which is, so it's meaningful to me that I get, my cover of Spoiler Alert and some of my other books, people DM'd me and emailed me and said that they cried when they saw it, because it was a version of someone who looked like they looked, that they had not always seen before on romance covers, or had not necessarily always read in a way that wasn't hurtful. So the sort of things that I was desperate to find growing up, and even sometimes now, that I'm privileged enough to be able to put out into the world, and I'm very grateful for that.
I think that's really awesome. And there's definitely a lot of people out there that are very excited about that, because, we're not all size 2 or perfect perky boobs or anything like that, right? I love that.
I know that my boobs do not perk. It's true.
So what about you, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think I grew up with stories always in my head. Like, I can remember when I was a kid resisting falling asleep, because the day would be over and it would be my time to just sort of run these little movies in my head. And I didn't realize until much, much later in life, like, I took this long circuitous route, that you could actually make that your job. So it's possible to do that. And I still have moments where I think, I can't believe I'm so lucky that this is my job, that I get to make this crap up.
Yeah.
And it becomes a real thing. So I feel selfishly really lucky that I've landed in this job. But I also feel like that sentiment applies in an expanded way to the romance community. I feel like we all hang around and sort of play pretend in each other's worlds and in fictional worlds that, we all love. And what a great thing. And I don't think it's tempting. And sometimes people say this, that, oh, that's just unrealistic, or you're just living in your head. I think it's really good for people to tell stories and read stories and sort of consume fiction. And I just love being part of that world.
Well, I think you're right, because even though we're writing fiction, oftentimes we're presenting solutions to problems people might have or might be facing, or even maybe down the road, and they think, wait a second, I know what I can do about this because I lived through another character who lived through it. So I think, like, we have a really big job besides just daydreaming all day long, which is one of the funnest things ever, is that we can sort of be like, I don't want to say like counselors or anything, but we are just like really important, I think, in what we tell. That's
right. And, you know, like I think of the, you know, the project of romance is about showing path to love, that everyone deserves love. And,
yeah.
you know, women especially deserve good love and friendship and all that other stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's a pretty cool thing.
It's so true. Like I remember growing up, I started reading romance. Like I read classics and things, but I started reading historical romance by Julie Garwood when I was 14. Oh. And she really changed the way I viewed dating relationships, which is, you know, silly thinking about like this brawny Scottish Highlander was going to come whisk me away. But he just respected his heroine and he treated her very well. And you know, in the bedroom, things were great. And I was like, well, that's what I want. And it sort of helped, you know, frame the way I viewed different guys that I was dating throughout high school, etc. So it's kind of cool like that. All right, Tessa, back to you. Do you know the ending when you start a book? And did you ever know the ending? Well, sorry, I'm reading this wrong. This is what happens when you're reading notes. So my question is, did you know the ending when you started this book? And if you did know the ending, did you end up changing any of it as you were writing?
Well, once my editor got a hold of it, they changed it. I was required to. No, I didn't know. I knew that the heroine's like neuroses were going to ruin everything in the 11th hour. There had to be something kind of that would trigger her to go back on all the progress she'd made to like become confident in herself. And so I knew that had to happen. I didn't know what the vehicle was going to be. And that's most of the time for me. I kind of know what the dark moment is going to look like. I just don't know what the setting is going to be and what exactly is going to trigger it or get them there. In this case, you know, well, I can't, I'll spoil the book. No. But yeah, you know, she basically has been making all this progress to become this confident person who can like trust men again and trust relationships again. And then, you know, it blows up in her face or she thinks it's blowing up in her face. And so she immediately just goes back to square one. And so I knew that had to happen, but I don't always know the ending. Sometimes I'll start with an ending though. And that's like what I know I have to get to. So it really just depends on the book. It's really case by case for me. Each book is different. And it's like I'm at 50 books at this point and I don't have a process. So if somebody, I don't know when that's supposed to kick in.
I don't know if that does. You know, I've written almost 60 books or over 60 books. I don't even keep track anymore, but I have the same issue. Sometimes I'll write the ending first and then
really
the rest of it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's
to get there. Like, I think because I have a problem with the middle, like, and the beginning. Actually, I have a problem with everything. But sometimes I just need to finish it and then like actually write it. If that makes sense.
No, it's like The Secret, right? You're like, I have written the ending of this book. I have no choice but to get there.
Right.
Universe, this is going to be a finished book.
Yeah.
I think, okay, I'll borrow that. I'll try that.
Yeah, but just be careful because sometimes I then end up boxing myself in and then I get really like.
I will absolutely do that.
Perfect. What about you, Alexandria?
Yeah, I have to know the ending. If I don't, I stall out at like 18,000 words and it's a mess, and then I have to go back and it's a catastrophe for everyone. And I think my editor would kill me if that happened. So yeah, I need to know the ending. I'm a massive plotter. I have spreadsheets and like I'm like calculating like 25% this has to happen, 50% this has to happen. I'm like super analytical about it. And especially with Written in the Stars, with certain nods to Pride and Prejudice and Bridget Jones's Diary, I wanted certain beats to kind of model the beats in the inspiration. So I knew the ending, the black moment, and then the grovel scene. I knew what was coming.
The grovel scene. Oh, I can't wait to read that. That's the best. What about you, Olivia?
I usually have a good, I know where the book is going. I'm not probably as much of a plotter as Alexandria, but at least I know sort of the main things I need to hit during the course of the book. I will say though that, this last book, I ran it by my editor, Elle, and her notes are always, I particularly right now, my tolerance for angst and drama is low. And so basically her notes are like, hurt them more. Make them suffer, Olivia. And I'm like, but they're so nice. I don't care. Make them hurt. So I'm like, but I can make it heart-wrenching. I promise. She's like, no, you have to make it worse.
Oh my gosh.
So basically, the basic ending was there, but I had to make it hurt more. So,
makes sense. It makes that like happily ever after at the end all the better when they've been through so much.
Now, I will say that in my self-pubbed books, that I sometimes do not have like the bleak moment is not super bleak. Like that's not what tearing them apart is not what it's about. And I do think there's room for that. But I'm not sure that traditional publishing is into that as much. But my self-pub books, that I do have a couple where like they don't like fully break up. It's like, anyway, that's a separate topic. I'll let it go for now.
I like that topic though. So maybe we'll have to come back to that because you have a really good point about how you can take a little bit more risk in self-publishing things and doing things the way that you want versus maybe what a more traditional publisher is expecting in a novel. So we should definitely chat about that. What about you, Jennifer?
Well, I guess there's sort of a practical answer to this, which is that when you sell a project to a publisher, not always, but often you're selling more than one book at once. So this book is book 1 of 3. And when you sell to a publisher, you usually have a proposal and some sample chapters and a pretty detailed synopsis of that first book because they're buying that book and a few others. So to me, I'm always pretty airtight on what's going to happen in the first book, and it's partly written by the time I've sold it. And then the other two, like my best guess is sort of what I'm putting in. So. I have found though over the years that the books that I spend the time to totally think through are so much easier to write. So I've tried to treat every book as if it was book 1 of a series that I was desperately trying to sell before I start writing. I'm not always successful in that, but A Princess for Christmas was one of those books, and I was pretty clear on how it was going to go. There was one, I can't really get into it without spoiling the ending, but there was one sort of major fork in the road where the story would have worked either way and they would have had their happily ever after, but I had to kind of work through with my editor which way they were going to go. But I knew the ending.
Awesome. So you guys have kind of like brought me to another question I was going to ask later, but each of you kind of talked a little bit about it during this past question. So just going to toss it out there. Tessa, pantser or plotter?
I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I think Alexandra mentioned beats, like having certain beats that you want to hit, and that's something I know going in always is like I have maybe 6 points I need to get to in order for the plot to work. And for the character growth to happen and everything. But in terms of how I'm going to get to each of those beats, it's sometimes it changes. And usually I know what the first 4 or 5 chapters are going to look like. And then after that, for some reason, when I meet the characters and I've been writing them for a little while, their motivations sort of reveal themselves to me more. And it just changes the course of the story a little bit. But it's never like, I never throw out the baby with the bathwater. It's usually like, just, okay, I need to switch gears a little bit here. I'm not going to get to the next beat the way I'd planned. It's going to be different. So I think I'm like a plotzer. Yeah.
I think that's the right word for it.
Yeah.
What about you, Alexandria?
Hardcore plotter, but there is a little wiggle room, especially in my own revision before I send it off to my editor. So I'll read through and I'll be like, oh, this isn't working. I'm going to change this. And so I do deviate, but my first draft is like written in an outline before I actually draft it. So plotter, yeah.
That's basically how I do it too. Like I have like a little paragraph for each chapter and it's like hardcore plotted down. And then I have like obviously the little wiggle room here and there, but every time I try to pants, I just end up like, I don't know, it takes me twice as long to write the story and it gives me so much anxiety.
Stresses me out. I get so stressed and then I stall myself out looking at the blank page. I'm like, oh, I'm terrified of the blank page. I can't do it. I need the paragraph.
It's terrible. That's basically what I do. What about you, Olivia?
The first book I ever wrote, the one time that I did not have any sort of plot ahead of time, my story was missing what story experts typically call a plot, because I just didn't put one of those in. I had a lot of sex and a lot of banter, but that was what I had, which was good in its own way, but it probably could have used a plot. So since then, I have begun to at least sort of give a sense of the major story parts that I need to hit. Because I have found that, like Alexandria, if I have no idea what's supposed to happen in a chapter or what's supposed to happen next, it's become very anxiety inducing for me. To be blunt, the world and my life have become very anxiety inducing for me. And I'm trying to take that out of my writing as much as I can. So like I may know that in a chapter that they are going to, for instance, have dinner, and that at some point during the dinner, she's going to have to talk about why she left her last job, right? Or burnout or whatever. But where they're going to go and how they're going to get to that conversation, I might not nail down ahead of time, which gives me a little freedom to feel creative within the scene while knowing that there is still a point to the scene and that there will be a plot at some point that is being followed. So that's sort of the compromise that I've come to over time.
That's great. I love that. What about you, Jennifer?
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't write or think in terms of beats, but I do, and I don't plan out the plot, like in terms of what is going to happen. But I do start with an idea of what is keeping them apart at the beginning. And then I also, I don't always succeed, but I feel like I'm happiest when the characters in my books undergo sort of individually a journey that's separate from the romance. It might be because of the romance, it might be sparked because of the romance, but there's a character growth that happens on each of their parts that it's going to keep happening regardless of how the romance ends. I mean, it's romance novels, so we know it's going to end well, but like I think about it in terms of what do they have to learn? What does each of them have to learn? And if I know those things, I'm usually pretty good to start. And then I, like Tessa, I sort of iterate what I learn as I go. Kind of, I start over many, many times. I don't start over writing, but I start over reading and sort of futzing. The best metaphor I ever heard was from a writer named Tamsin Parker, who writes great books, highly recommend them. She calls it quilting. So it's not like it's a linear thing. It's like, here's a square, here's a square, here's a square. And as more squares appear, you start to see what the whole is. And each square kind of helps you arrange the whole, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that. That's cool. I'll have to look that process up. That's interesting. So we're going to hand the questions over to readers. But before we do that, I want each of you to do one more quick thing for me, real quick. What is an important fact you want readers to know about your books? And Tessa, you can go.
Ooh. Going first is the hardest. I want to switch with Jenny. one important fact about my books is that they're hopeful, that they'll make you feel hopeful, and they'll make you, they're escapism, and they're happy. That's more than one fact. But I think it's, yeah, I would say I would like readers to pick up my books because they know it's going to make them feel hopeful and happy.
That's perfect. What about you, Alexandria?
Yeah, very hopeful. Not gonna be very angst heavy. I mean, there's angst, but it's not gonna be, like rip out your heart. Especially with Written in the Stars. What I want readers to know is that even though there's a big astrology aspect, you don't need to come into it knowing anything about astrology. I do want to stress that because I've had some people wonder, do I need to know anything about this? No, it's like, you don't need to know anything.
Perfect. Olivia?
I mean, I would say that I would describe my books as sweet, but not sweet in the sense that is sometimes used sort of in marketing to mean no graphic sex, because there is definitely graphic sex and a lot of obscenity. And I sort of, I like the F word, what can I say? But I want to sort of separate the idea of sweetness, meaning you can have a book that is quite sweet, but still be steamy and still have, cursing in it, but still have a fundamental sweetness to it. And I think that that's probably a decent description of what I write.
I totally agree with that. Jennifer?
Well, this isn't an important fact, but it's sort of a silly fact, which is that all my books in the last 10 or so have a grilled cheese sandwich in them, because the story behind that is that several books ago now, I was writing a scene where the hero was making a grilled cheese sandwich in the middle of the night, and because I don't know, there must be some reason that I like grilled cheese, but I was writing it and I thought, this is seeming a little familiar to me, and then I realized that 2 books ago, same series, there was also a grilled cheese sort of not middle of the night, but made for the heroine. And then I realized, to my dawning horror, that I also had a grilled cheese that was actually like a huge part of the plot, like 4 books ago in a standalone book. And I had like this panic. So I called my editor. I was like, I'm plagiarizing myself. I have no new ideas. And she says, oh, no, it's fine. And then we actually sort of started jokingly talking about, well, what if you started doing it on purpose? So I did. So now there's a grilled cheese in every book, and it's become kind of, and it's not always like, you might blink and you miss it in Princess for Christmas, but in some books it's a little bit more of a thing. And there's different, some of them are fancy, some of them have like processed cheese in them, some of them have fancy cheese, but it's become a joke now. So I have like fans who look for the grilled cheese, and it's become a fun thing.
I love grilled cheese, and I think that's hilarious. That's really funny. Well, thank you guys. I'm going to turn it over to Debbie, who has some reader questions.
I do. Thank you, Eliza. That was great. We really appreciate you doing this. The first thing is to you is tell us about your book. You didn't talk about your book at all. So tell us about.
I hate focusing on myself. So my latest release was The Rebel Wears Plaid, and it's the first book in my Prince Charlie's Angels series. And it takes place during the Jacobite rebellion in Scotland. And my heroine is sort of going against her brother, who has sided with the English or British government versus those rebels in Scotland who want Bonnie Prince Charlie to take his place on the throne. And so she's raising an army in the middle of the night, and money and weapons. And my hero is the nephew of one of the greatest double-crossing spies for both sides. So he's kind of like up in the air about what he wants to do. And the moment they meet, which is one of my favorite scenes in the book, is that he has just escaped prison with his cousin. He's helped break his cousin out. And she's pointing her pistol at him, and she's like, well, I guess you're going to join my rebellion or I'm going to turn you in. And so they kind of go back and forth throughout the book, with her being, very in control of her army and steadfast in what she wants to do, and him trying to figure out what is the right thing to do, and they're falling in love the whole time. It's a little bit of a darker book. I wouldn't necessarily call it a rom-com. There's some comedy in all of my books, but this series in particular was really a struggle to write because everyone basically knows what happens at the end of this rebellion. They lose. So in each book, I had to have some notes of hopefulness. And the great thing that I was able to discover is each of my heroines is based on a real historical female rebel during that time period. And they all lived. So that's what I tell everyone, like, there's happily ever after, and it's real. Like, they really did live. So you don't have to worry about, like, I mean, we can worry about the massacre. It's very devastating, but they got to live. So there's some hope in there.
That's the important part, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have a lot of comments and questions for all of you. Some are specifically to each of you. One person said, sex, romance, and cussing, what more can you want in a novel? Thank you very much, Olivia and Jenny. So for Alexandria, this is from Danny. She says, I love that one of your lead characters is an astrologer. What prompted you to highlight astrology, and do you have a background in astrology?
I don't have a background in astrology, but I do have, I guess, like a hobby interest in it. I definitely follow, astro poets and Sanctuary World co-stars on my phone, so I get that notification every morning roasting me. I guess I was trying to think of a profession that would be the opposite of an actuary, and I came up with astrologer, specifically social media astrology. She looks toward the stars and Darcy looks to spreadsheets. So that's how I came up with that.
Awesome. Tessa, this is a great series. You talked a little bit about where you got your ideas from. How about your characters? Did they come from anybody specific?
No, not really. I think maybe the last book, Bethany, has a little bit of my tendency to overanalyze everything. So she was something that I was really excited to get to Tools of Engagement, her book, because maybe I could try and figure myself out while writing the book. But I wanted to have, I think when you form a series around a group of friends, they're all going to have very different personalities. And I think I kind of broke out of my usual, like I wrote a married woman. I wrote, someone who dated a lot, and I paired her with a younger man. I did kind of like a lot of different tropes that I had touched on before. And it was really fun to stretch my legs a little bit. But I don't really know anybody. I don't know anybody. I just sit here in this office all day.
This is actually for everybody. Is it harder to write a series or a standalone? Tessa, you want to start? Oh, I'll start with Jenny. Jenny, I'll start with you since Tessa.
I think they're both hard in different ways. I think a series is hard for me because the world building of a series starts to feel stifling after a while, because I have trouble knowing, okay, well, we better revisit this bar that they all like, and we better check in on all these other characters, and that starts to stress me out, and I think it starts to take away from the story that I'm trying to tell. But on the other hand, a series gives you an in to subsequent stories without reinventing the wheel. So I think there's pluses and minuses to both.
Anybody else want to chime in on that?
I can chime in. I like writing series for one thing because I hate giving up my characters, and it gives me a chance to revisit them. And I know readers will develop sort of like a love of a certain family or town or whatever, and they get to revisit all of that over and over again. The one difficult thing is if you end up boxing yourself in a corner, which I usually tend to do by book 3 or 4, with things that have happened in previous books that you have to also make sure happen in that book. That can be kind of difficult, but I mostly write in series just because I think well, at least for historical romance, readers really, really enjoy sort of like sagas and family things. And yeah.
With that, Olivia, your librarian series,
Yeah.
any more coming? And Stacy would like to know, she was trying to figure out where the Battlefield Library was.
So I am not great about making up locations. That is not one of my strong suits. I used to live in Hagerstown, actually. So
okay.
I'm from Maryland. I've seen Sykesville, where you are. And I used to work at the Washington County Free Library System. And there was the Smithsburg Library, which is a rural branch in the Washington County system. And it is right near a national park. And it is right near a playground. And basically, I just stole that library system.
Perfect.
I just wholesale lifted it and called it something else and made up a new name. And that is what I did. One of my librarian friends read the first book, and there's a description of like the layout, not like a huge description of the layout of the library, but some basics. And she's like, "This is our library, right?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, Tammy, it's our library."
That's perfect. That's awesome. And she also says that as a children's librarian, she's grateful that our stuffed animals are not out there on the floor. So she's very happy for that.
I was glad to break exciting new ground when it came to my characters having sex on top of tablecloth covered stuffed animals.
Yeah. Jenny, you said your dad reads your book. Does anybody else read your books?
Well, I grew up in Minnesota, and I like to joke that all that like Midwestern emotional sublimation actually comes in handy, because he reads my books and he tells me how great they are, but we don't actually talk about it. In terms of my immediate family, no. My mom is a retired librarian, but she's not a romance person. My sisters read some of them. I have two friends who read like every word that I write, who are not in the romance world, who are just civilians. But other than that, I don't think there's anybody who, in my life, who reads everything.
Right. How about you, Tessa?
My mother tried to read one of my books years ago, and she got to chapter 3, and then she gave it back to me, and she said, "My flesh wanted to continue, but my heart wouldn't let me." And then, so 45,000 hours of therapy later. But I have, nobody in my family reads them, but I have some friends who do. I actually had a mom over, like a mom friend, which is what I call like my kids' parents, my kids' friends' parents, like I know them because of my kid, was over at the house, and we had just read Untamed by Glennon Doyle. We were talking about that, and she goes, "But you know what I really like? I like romance." And she whispered it at me, and I was like, I said, "Do you know what I do for a living?" And she was like, "No." And I was like, "Write romance novels." And but it was so funny the way she like whispered it like it was a dirty secret. And I was like, "Honey, while your kid was here, I was plotting a blowjob scene. Like, this is not, we are not whispering here in my house." But so that's kind of like sparked like a friendship based on her, reading romance and me recommending romances to her. So yeah, it's definitely like friends wise more than family for me.
Alexandra?
Yeah, my mom and my aunt are definitely, readers. My aunt has been reading romance novels her whole life. So she was my first beta reader when I wrote a book that, hasn't been published. But so they read it. And then my friends, the wild thing was I had a friend from high school get an ARC on NetGalley and like messaged me and was like, "I got your ARC on NetGalley. I didn't realize this was you until I put 2 and 2 together." So that was wild. But yeah, so there are some people in my life that definitely read my books. Yeah.
Olivia?
My mother is a romance reader, but my mother, if it were up to her, all romances would be professional athletes who are also part-time firefighters, who also wear Stetsons and cradle infants. shirtlessly cradle infants. So like she is still waiting for the day that I write a cowboy or a professional athlete, and she's like, is this the one where there's gonna be a baby? And I'm like, no. there will literally never be a baby.
And Eliza, does anybody read yours in your family?
Yeah. So my mom prefers to read just my historical fiction novels, but my dad will get my romance novels on audio. And we sort of have the same thing where we don't talk about what Jenny said. We don't actually talk about the content, but he'll be like, this was really well done and the narrator did a great job. And I'm like, thank you. That's about the extent of it. And then I have some mom friends that read my books and my sisters read my books, but that's about it. Actually, my oldest daughter, who's in college, has read some of my historical fiction, but she wanted to read one of my romance novels, and I told her she had to wait till she was 18, and she read the first few chapters and was like, I can't, I hear your voice and it's creepy. And I was like, yeah, I thought so. So I'll take that back.
What are you all reading now? Alexandra, you want to start?
Just turned in a revision, so I'm not reading anything at the moment, but my TBR pile is a mountain high. I have You Had Me at Ola by Alexis Daria on the top of the stack. Let's see what else. The Roommate by Rosie Danon is also on that stack. So a huge to be read pile.
Olivia?
Well, probably toward the top of my TBR pile is, there may be someone that you've heard of, Alexandra Bellefleur's Written in the Stars is toward the top of my TBR. And I've been reading a lot of fanfic. I mean, I do love fan fiction genuinely. And it's just, you know, when you were asking Tessa for her favorite line earlier, I was thinking of my favorite lines I'd read recently, where some of them were from fan fiction, like deeply romantic, well written. So yeah.
Good. Jenny?
I am the last person to have read this, but I just finished Evie Drake Starts Over.
Okay. Yeah.
Fantastic. I loved it.
Absolutely.
And you know what? It was a little bit stressful, like from a professional point of view, because sometimes you try to think like, what's the hook here? And the hook is like better than anything I'll ever think of. But then it's just like a beautifully written book where not a lot happens, you know? Oh God, I just loved it. Yeah.
Tessa?
I just read, I think everybody's reading this. It just hit #1 on New York Times, Anxious People by Frederick Bachman.
Fabulous.
He's the Swedish author. And this story takes place like about an hour outside of Stockholm. And it's about a bank robber who accidentally takes a bunch of people hostage. And just them working through it's like there's an event that happened 10 years earlier that kind of affected all of them. And it's just them working through but it's also, it's like laugh out loud funny, and it has a lot of just like interesting, I don't know, sometimes I don't read a lot of books written by men, but sometimes when I read them and I get a point of view from a man, I'm always like, oh, it's so curious, like to see how men think, you know, because romance is my thing, you know, but it was kind of a cool departure from what I usually read, which is straight up romance. I've been reading like Carrie and Byrne. She's been getting me through the pandemic. Yeah, that's good.
Eliza, what are you reading right now?
I read a lot of thriller. So I just finished a book called My Lovely Wife, and that was really good. And I just started You Are Not Alone. I'm a really big sucker for thrillers.
Well, since you did say that, one of the questions is, if you could write in another genre, what would it be?
I would definitely write thriller. I have a few ideas.
Tessa?
Well, I'd always wanted to write paranormal, and I'm doing that. Like I'm writing a self-published paranormal series about vampires.
Fun.
Actually, it was like, I think it was KissCon last year, somebody in the audience asked, like, what's something that you have always wanted to write, but you never had the chance? And I was like, And I didn't even realize it until I said it, but I was like, I really want to write a family of morticians. I want to write a mortician because I love 6 Feet Under and I love dark humor. And so I did it. I just, I wrote a story about a heroine who like owns a funeral parlor and a vampire. This body gets brought into the morgue and she's looking down at this beautiful man. She's like, I can't believe he's dead. Like, this beautiful young man. And then he wakes up and his friends had brought him there as a prank while he was sleeping. He's a vampire.
And when is it coming out?
That's out.
Oh, it is. And what's it called?
Oh, Reborn Yesterday.
Okay, great. Everybody pick it up. Alexandra.
Probably paranormal, but it would be like a paranormal rom-com. So I'm
There
gonna
you go.
stick with rom-com. I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so it would have to have like influences of that. So not like the really grim dark, so a little lighter, definitely that. Yeah.
Jenny?
I don't know if I actually could. I feel like I have one great YA idea and one great literary fiction idea, but I don't know if I could actually do it. Like, I don't think I could do it.
Olivia?
I have a basic idea for actually a ghost, like a ghost romance rom-com. I want to write.
Okay. Ghost of Mrs. Muir, remember that?
Yes, although maybe, yes, I watched that movie a bunch of times when I was
But a little sexier and a little bit more going on, right?
Yes, sex and cursing, as
There
is
you
my
go.
husband.
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. We really appreciate this. It's a great event for us for our Book Lovers Week, and we're all looking forward to all the books being out. Don't forget, anybody who wants to order the book, or if it's already out, we have it at the store, and we will have book plates for you all to put in the books. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night, and we look forward to all your books coming out shortly.
Thank
Thank
you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.